The name said it all. Bank of United States. It sounded like government, like the Federal Reserve, like money backed by an entire nation. It was none of that. It was a private bank. In December of 1930, at a branch in the Bronx, a crowd arrived at its doors, convinced their money was safe. What triggered their fear wasn't a federal rumor, it was the news of a canceled merger. When that merger was canceled, the panic began, and when the panic spread, banking history changed. What no one knew was why it started. This story ends in a line that couldn't be stopped. The question that matters isn't the date of its fall. It's how a private bank, without treasury backing, could be treated like a federal agency. The answer wasn't in the buildings, it was in the name. On June 23, 1913, at 77 Delancey Street, it opened its doors with $100,000 in capital and $50,000 in surplus. It was founded by Joseph S. Marcus, a German Jewish immigrant who had already created the public bank in 1906. He wasn't an amateur. He knew that, in banking, the name matters as much as the capital. That's why he chose one that occupied the entire symbolic space. For 12 years, however, the name wasn't exploited. By 1925, the network remained minimal. Prudence ruled. Then, on July 3, 1927, Joseph S. Marcus died. Control passed to his son Bernard K. Marcus, a teller in 1913, vice president since 1918. He didn't inherit a network of branches, he inherited a brand, and he decided to stretch it to the limit. What he didn't know was that every new branch came with a price, from 5 branches in 1925 to 62 in 1930. That figure wasn't just ambition, it was an expansion that had multiplied the network by more than 12 in 5 years. In April of 1928, it absorbed the Central Mercantile Bank and Trust Company, and Bernard Marcus assumed the presidency. In August, the Cosmopolitan Bank. In April of 1929, it added the Bank of the Rockaways and the Colonial Bank. In May, it closed the merger with the Municipal Bank and Trust Company. With that operation, the bank became the 3rd largest in New York and the 28th in the United States. Its shares had a book value of $60. The 1929 dividend was $2. Each merger expanded the network and added depositors, but every new branch represented a new promise, and every promise demanded cash, liquidity, and trust. That's the exact point where growth stops being a virtue and becomes a burden. How much of that empire was real capital, and how much was just an expanding brand? That question wasn't being asked in the boardrooms. It would be asked very soon on the street. Because on the street, no one asks about book value. They only ask one thing: will my money be here tomorrow? In capitalism, growing fast isn't a mistake, but growing fast with a name that suggests government backing changes the perception of risk. And perception in banking is everything. There's a difference between growing and consolidating. Growing requires buying, consolidating requires paying. And in 1930, the bank would discover that the second bill was higher than the first. In mid-1930, the leadership sought a solution befitting its size. 4 major banks began negotiations to form a single megabank. The names didn't matter, the scale did. Manufacturers Trust, Public National, International Bank, and the Bank of United States. To chair it, they appointed J. Herbert Case, president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It wasn't a symbolic retreat, it was the pinnacle of the New York financial system. On November 24, 1930, the agreement was announced. It looked like the ultimate safety net, a bank too big to fail. On December 8, 1930, the plan fell apart. The difficulties in guaranteeing the deposits of the Bank of United States proved insurmountable. Legal complications, real estate problems. It wasn't a technicality, it was an X-ray of the balance sheet. Mergers had built an institution. The name had wrapped it in a promise, but the promise depended on a merger that had just died. The market understood it instantly. A bailout that didn't arrive was a sentence. The bank wasn't federal. It had never been. But in December 1930, that legal distinction didn't matter. People weren't withdrawing money from a legal entity, they were withdrawing money from a promise. Why could a failed merger trigger a bank run? Because savers don't read balance sheets, they read signals. And the signal was unmistakable. A bank with a nation's name needed to be rescued, and the rescue had just failed. That same December, at a branch in the Bronx, the inevitable erupted. Images from the era show crowds in front of the bank. They weren't asking for explanations. They didn't want reports. They wanted their money. Every minute that passed, the line grew, and every withdrawal made the next one more likely. What was it that the crowd didn't know about that bank? Something the accounts hid, something the failed merger had just exposed. The crowd didn't read balance sheets, didn't ask questions, only saw a name, and that name was enough. Bank runs have a simple mechanics. The more people withdraw, the more people want to withdraw. The bank doesn't have to be broke. It's enough that people believe it could break. That belief in December 1930 was already unstoppable. The rumor didn't need verdicts, didn't need balance sheets. It only needed a name, and the name said it all. The panic didn't stay in the Bronx. A bank with a nation's name was shaking. If that bank could fall, no other seemed safe. It wasn't a federal bank, but it was the one that turned fear into system. Distrust stopped being an isolated phenomenon. It became contagious. Depositors at other banks looked at their own bills and asked themselves the same question: will my money be safe tomorrow? That question traveled from window to window. The banking crisis of the Great Depression has a symbolic date, December 1930, and a place, a branch in the Bronx. What the crowd didn't know is that the bank had never been federal. There was no treasury behind it. There was no Federal Reserve answering for every bill. There was only a name, and a name doesn't cover a panic. The collapse wasn't immediate. It came in 1931, after the confidence had already been broken. The Bank of United States ceased to exist. It didn't collapse alone. It took with it the illusion that a name could sustain a bank. A mirage had been built, and, like all mirages, it didn't survive the dawn of a bank run. The name was a promise. The reality was another. And when reality took over, not even the promise of a nation was enough to stop the line. From 5 branches in 1925 to 62 in 1930, from private bank to symbol, from symbol to collapse in 1931. The panic of December 1930 lit the fuse of a crisis that would mark an entire generation. In honest capitalism, trust is the most delicate asset. It is built over decades, and it can crumble in a single morning. Institutions can be rebuilt. Trust, not.